The teen girl who poisoned an entire SS garrison. Vitebsk, Belarus, 1943. In the basement kitchen of a converted school that now served as a German military canteen, a 17-year-old girl named Zinaida Portnova stirred a massive pot of soup with hands that would not stop shaking. The steam rose into her face, carrying the smell of cabbage and potatoes and something else, something bitter that made her throat close with terror every time she breathed it in. She was small for her age, barely 5 feet tall, with dark blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun and pale blue eyes that had learned to look at the floor whenever German soldiers passed. Her clothes hung loose on a frame that had shed 20 pounds since the occupation began. To the soldiers who barked orders at her, to the other kitchen workers who kept their distance, she was nobody. A local, a child, harmless. But every morning when she arrived at the kitchen, when she tied her apron and picked up her knife, Zinaida Portnova carried a secret that meant a noose or a bullet or worse. She was killing them, slowly, methodically. One meal at a time, not 10 soldiers, not 20. In the operation she was preparing right now, the one that would end in 6 hours when the officers sat down for their midday meal, she would poison at least 100 German personnel. Each one represented orders given, villages burned, children shot. She was making them disappear as if she could erase the war itself one bowl of soup at a time. The kitchen was the administrative heart of the German military apparatus in the Vitebsk region. This was where officers planned operations, where intelligence reports were compiled, where the machinery of occupation ran on regular meals, and the assumption that nobody would dare strike at them here. The basement had low ceilings that trapped the heat from massive coal stoves. Pots clanged against metal surfaces. German voices echoed down stone corridors. Sharp commands, laughter, the click of boots on floors above her head. The smell was overwhelming. Boiling meat, burnt onions, the metallic tang of blood from the butchering room. Her job gave her access to everything. Every pot, every ingredient. Every meal before it went upstairs to the dining hall. But Zinaida Portnova was not what she seemed. She had been 14 when the Germans arrived in Vitebsk in July 1941. Born in Leningrad, she had been visiting her grandmother for the summer, a holiday that was supposed to last 6 weeks. It lasted 4 years and cost her everything. She had been an ordinary girl who liked books, wrote poetry in a notebook with a blue cover, wanted to study medicine. She had 2 younger siblings back in Leningrad and parents who wrote letters that stopped coming after the first winter of the siege. In August 1941, she witnessed something that burned away the girl she used to be. She was walking past the village square in Obel when she heard the trucks. German soldiers were herding people into the square families from the Jewish quarter. She watched from behind a fence as they separated children from adults. She watched them line up 32 people against the wall of the church. She was close enough to see their faces, close enough to hear the mother who kept saying, "Please," in German, over and over, holding her daughter who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. She was close enough to smell the diesel exhaust and the sick sweet smell of fear. She heard the order. She heard the shots. She saw the bodies fall. That night, lying in bed, she could still hear the mother's voice. "Please, please, please." The next morning, she found the Komsomol underground. A boy named Nikolai, who had been in her school, brought her to a meeting in a barn where teenagers were planning sabotage operations they had no equipment to execute. When she proposed infiltrating the German kitchen, they thought she was crazy. A 14-year-old girl in the heart of enemy operations, where one mistake meant torture and execution. "You'll last a week," Nikolai said. She lasted 2 years. The Germans ran their occupation with mechanical precision. The food supply chain was militarized. Every potato, every cabbage counted and logged. Kitchen staff was vetted. Families investigated. The food was tested before serving. Before any meal reached the officers, a sample went to the commander. He tasted it. If he didn't collapse, the meal was approved. This system had detected 3 poisoning attempts in the first year. All 3 poisoners had been hanged in the square the same day. The penalties were calculated to destroy not just the individual but any incentive for resistance. If you were caught, you weren't shot quickly. You were taken to basement interrogation rooms, where the Gestapo had instruments refined over years of occupation. You were tortured for names. Then, you were hanged publicly. Your body left for 3 days. Your family was arrested. Your house was burned. But the Germans had overlooked something. They had overlooked the fact that a teenage girl who looked 12 years old and never spoke unless spoken to could access things that protocols said she couldn't. That in a kitchen serving 100 meals 3 times daily, chaos was normal. That the rotating guard schedule meant different soldiers every day, none of whom knew the routine well enough to spot when something was slightly off. They overlooked her. Zinaida's method was terrifyingly simple. She worked the morning shift, arriving at 5 a.m. when the kitchen was still dark. She prepared vegetables in the corner, partially obscured by massive storage shelves. She was so quiet that guards often forgot she was there. The poison came from the Partisan unit rat poison, mostly arsenic-based compounds stolen from German supply depots. Also crushed castor beans, contaminated food from diseased animals. The partisans smuggled it to her in tiny amounts, hidden in bread loaves, sewn into her coat lining, once in a hollow potato. She kept it in a small tin that had once held German tobacco, hidden in a crack in the foundation wall behind the vegetable bins. The first time she used it was September 1941, a Wednesday. The midday meal was barley soup with pork. She waited until the soup was in serving vessels, until the kitchen was in organized chaos. She was carrying a bowl of salt, a normal task. She stumbled near the soup cauldron. Her hand dipped in. The powder dissolved instantly. 1 second, maybe 2. By 1 p.m., 12 officers were in the infirmary with violent illness. By evening, 3 were dead. The Germans called it food poisoning. Contaminated meat. They shot the local supplier. Zinaida went home and couldn't eat for 2 days. She had killed 3 human beings. She was 14 years old, but she had also delayed a planned operation against a partisan hideout. While the sick officers recovered, 4 families escaped the city with warnings from the underground. She did it again 2 weeks later. Then again, by January 1942, she had poisoned German personnel 14 times. The Germans never suspected her. How could they? She was a child. How much longer before luck ran out? By spring 1942, Zinaida had executed 23 poisoning operations. The Partisan unit had expanded her mission. She was a courier, carrying messages between the kitchen and the underground. She was intelligence, memorizing German conversations and reporting troop movements. She was sabotage, grinding glass into flour, loosening bolts on vehicles. She was 17 years old. She weighed 90 pounds. She had not had a full night's sleep in a year. Then came the day the system adapted. A new commandant arrived, Hauptmann Ernst Weber, transferred from Poland, with a reputation for brutal efficiency and a paranoid obsession with partisan activity. He stood in the kitchen doorway at 6 a.m., watching with eyes that missed nothing. He spoke Russian, fluently. Weber implemented changes immediately. Random bag searches, a new guard to watch preparation areas, a requirement that all workers remain in sight of supervision, and most dangerous. He personally observed food testing, watching from ingredient inspection to final tasting, then waiting 30 minutes before authorizing service. Zinaida could not poison main dishes anymore, but Weber had overlooked something. In his focus on meal preparation, he hadn't changed protocols for beverages the coffee and tea officers consumed throughout the day, prepared in small batches, tested perfunctorily, if at all. On April 2, during breakfast chaos, she poisoned the officers' coffee. Not the main urn, the smaller pot used for refills. Prepared after initial testing was done. By 9 a.m., 8 officers were violently ill. 1 died that afternoon. Weber ordered the entire kitchen staff assembled. He walked down the line, studying each face. He stopped in front of Zinaida. "You," he said in Russian. "How long have you worked here?" 8 months, Herr Kommandant. "Look at me when I speak to you." She looked up, met his eyes. He saw a thin, frightened girl with chapped hands and a face that looked closer to 12 than 17. He moved on, but Zinaida could feel it now. The weight of attention. At night, she lay awake, with her heart pounding so hard she thought it would wake the neighbors. Her hands shook when she tried to eat. She started having nightmares, not of being caught, but of her grandmother hanging in the square, of Nikolai being tortured, of the partisan unit being rounded up because she had made one mistake. She spent 3 nights weighing her options. Continue and eventually be identified. Stop and end the disruption to German operations. Flee and abandon her grandmother. On the 4th morning, she arrived at the kitchen with a new tin of poison hidden in her coat. She had decided she would continue until they caught her. Just as she thought she had found a way to work within Weber's protocols, the close call arrived that almost ended everything. A Gestapo investigator named Hoffman arrived with a theory that the saboteur had to be a long-term kitchen worker. He had a list of names. Zinaida's name was on it. When her turn came for questioning, she walked to his table with trembling hands. "Zinaida Martinovna Portnova," he said. 17 years old, from Leningrad. You've been present during 17 incidents of food contamination. Does that seem like a coincidence to you?" She had prepared for this. She made her voice small, let tears come to her eyes. "I don't understand, sir. I only prepare vegetables. I'm not near the cooking. But you move through the kitchen. You have access. So does everyone, sir. But not everyone has family in Leningrad. Not everyone has reason to hate us." She made her voice even smaller. "I don't hate anyone, sir. I just want to go home. I want to know if my parents are alive." Hoffman studied her. She could see him calculating the thin, frightened girl versus the systematic poisoner he was hunting. "Stand up," he said. He searched her. Pockets empty, except for a handkerchief and bread crust. The poison tin was hidden in the kitchen, not on her person. Her arms showed only bruises from kitchen work. "Go back to work," he said finally. That night, Zinaida shook for 3 hours. But Hoffman's investigation had made Weber paranoid. The Kommandant implemented even stricter protocols. For 3 weeks, she could not execute any operations. Then came June 14. Her grandmother was arrested. Not for anything she had done, for being the grandmother of a girl whose name was in Gestapo files. They took her to the cells under headquarters, the same building where Zinaida worked. Zinaida had one advantage. She knew the building. She knew which guards were lazy, which doors were left unlocked during meal service, which basement corridors connected to the kitchen. She had access to keys. A German officer left his key ring in the kitchen during meals. The partisan unit had copied 2 keys. On June 16, at 7 p.m., during evening meal service, she slipped out of the kitchen with copied keys in her pocket and a kitchen knife hidden in her sleeve. The hallway to the basement cells was empty. Her heart was beating so hard, she thought it would break her ribs. She unlocked the corridor door, moved quickly downstairs, past interrogation rooms where someone was crying. Her grandmother was in the 3rd cell. When she saw Zinaida, her face went white. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Getting you out." They almost made it. The guard came around the corner as they reached the kitchen corridor. A young soldier who froze when he saw them. Then he grabbed for his rifle. Zinaida moved. The kitchen knife was in her hand, and then it was in the guard's stomach. She felt it go in, felt the resistance, felt the warmth of blood on her hands. She had just killed a man. not with poison from a distance. She had looked him in the eyes and put a knife in him. They ran through back corridors, out the service entrance, into the night. Behind them, she heard shouting, the alarm. Nikolai met them at a partisan camp in the forest. Her grandmother was safe, but Zinaida was now compromised. Her face was known. The kitchen job was finished. Within days, the network collapsed. The guard she had killed had given a description before he died. The Gestapo began systematic arrests of anyone connected to the kitchen staff. Within a week, 5 partisan contacts were captured. Nikolai was arrested on June 25. The partisan leadership made the decision: evacuate, disperse, go to ground. But Zinaida couldn't run yet, because she had left something behind that could still hurt them. Before her grandmother's arrest, she had been planning one final operation. The Germans were preparing a major offensive against partisan positions. Officers were gathering for briefings, and in 3 days, those officers would all gather for a special banquet to celebrate the upcoming operation. 100 German personnel in one room. She had already positioned the poison hidden in a bag of flour marked for use on June 19 for the banquet bread. The partisan unit had a contact still working in the kitchen. Zinaida sent word. The flour bag, marked with a small blue thread, goes into the banquet bread. All of it. For 3 days, she hid in the forest camp with no way to know if the plan would work. For 3 days, she jumped at every sound, certain the Germans were coming. On June 19, at 2 p.m., she heard the news. The banquet had started at noon. By 1 p.m., every single person in the dining hall was violently ill. By 3 p.m., 73 German officers and military personnel were in the infirmary. By evening, estimates ranged from 15 to 30 deaths. The operation plan for the Berezina region was cancelled. Zinaida had just executed the largest single poisoning operation of any partisan in the region. She had crippled German command infrastructure. She was 17 years old. She weighed 85 pounds. She could not stop crying. The Germans went insane with rage. The manhunt intensified. They arrested anyone with connections to the kitchen. They executed 12 people publicly. They offered rewards for information. Nikolai broke under interrogation. Not from torture, from drugs. He told them everything. Her name, her appearance, her grandmother's location, the fact that she was operating with partisans in the forest. The surveillance began immediately. The Germans couldn't find the partisan camp, but they could watch. They could wait. They inserted informers, tracked supply routes, questioned everyone who left the city. Zinaida knew she was being hunted. The partisan leaders moved her between camps, never staying more than 2 nights. She changed her appearance, cut her hair short, dressed in boys' clothes, but her face was known. Posters with her description were in every German office. The reward for information was 10,000 Reichsmarks. The physical deterioration was obvious. She was skeletal, her face hollow, her hands trembling constantly. She had a persistent cough. She ran fevers. Other partisans whispered that she had done enough, that she should be sent away from combat. But she couldn't stop, because stopping meant remembering. It meant thinking about what she had become. At night, she tried to calculate whether she was a hero or a monster. The answer came in August 1942. The partisan unit needed reconnaissance on a German supply depot. Zinaida volunteered. She shouldn't have. She was too well known, too hunted. But the unit was short on scouts. It was a trap. The Germans had fed false intelligence, information designed to draw out partisan scouts. When Zinaida approached the perimeter, she walked into a cordon of German soldiers. Her companions tried to fight. Both were killed. Zinaida ran. She made it 200 meters before a soldier tackled her. She fought. She bit. She scratched. She got the knife from her boot and nearly cut the soldier's throat before 3 more Germans pulled her off. The officer in charge checked her description against the posters. "I think we've found our poisoner," he said in German. They bound her hands. They put her in a truck. The ride to Gestapo headquarters took 30 minutes. As they led her through the doors, past the offices where she had worked for 9 months, down the stairs to the basement, she felt something unexpected. Pride. She had done this. A girl from Leningrad, who liked poetry and wanted to study medicine. She had infiltrated the German war machine. She had killed their officers, with poison in their food. She had become a weapon using nothing but her hands and her courage and her rage. They could torture her. They could kill her. But they could not undo what she had done. The interrogation began within hours. The room was concrete with a metal table, 2 chairs, and a drain in the floor dark with old blood. The interrogator was Hauptsturmführer Klaus Reinhardt, Gestapo, trained in extracting information from partisans. He started with questions. Name, age, village. Then, the real questions. "You poisoned German personnel?" "No, we have evidence. We know you killed at least 80 officers." She said nothing. "Tell me about your partisan contacts. Give me names." "I don't know any partisans." Her strategy was simple. Protect the network. Every hour she held out was another hour for the partisan unit to evacuate, to warn contacts, to disappear. Reinhardt tried for 3 hours. Questions, threats, promises. When that failed, he brought in photographs, pictures of Nikolai after interrogation, barely recognizable. Pictures of executed partisans. Pictures of what would happen to her grandmother. She looked at each photograph. She said nothing. The psychological torture methods began. Stress positions for hours until her muscles screamed. Cold water, then heat, alternating until she couldn't stop shaking. Bright lights and loud sounds preventing sleep, breaking down her defenses through exhaustion. Between sessions, they left her alone in the dark. This was worse than active torture. In the dark, she had nothing to do but think about what was coming next, about whether she could endure it, about the moment when her body would betray her, how she resisted. She thought about her grandmother, about her parents, about every person who would die if she talked. She turned her fear into anger, her pain into defiance. When she wanted to scream, she bit her tongue until it bled. When she wanted to break, she recited poetry in her head, verses she had memorized before the war. On August 15, the 3rd day, they escalated. Reinhardt returned with instruments, pliers, electrical wires, a bucket of water. He laid them out where she could see them. "Last chance," he said. "Give me names." She looked at the instruments. She looked at Reinhardt. "Go to hell," she said in Russian. The trial came on August 20. It was held in a military court. No jury, just 3 German officers as judges. There was no defense attorney. The evidence was overwhelming. Testimony from survivors, testimony from captured partisans, physical evidence from the kitchen. The prosecutor called her a terrorist, a murderer, an enemy of the Reich. The judges deliberated for 10 minutes. The verdict was guilty. The sentence was death by firing squad. When they read the sentence, Zinaida felt nothing. She had known this was coming since the moment she was captured. Her reaction surprised the court. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She stood straight, looked the judges in their eyes and said, "I regret nothing. I would do it again." The guards had to drag her from the courtroom because she was smiling. Zinaida Portnova was executed by firing squad on August 28, 1942, in the courtyard of Gestapo headquarters in Vitebsk. She was 17 years old. According to accounts that survived, she walked to the execution post without assistance. She refused a blindfold. When offered a final statement, she spoke in Russian, loudly enough for prisoners in the cells to hear. "Tell my grandmother I love her. Tell the partisans to keep fighting. Russia will be free. The officer offered her a cigarette. She took it but didn't smoke it. She held it between her fingers like a small act of defiance. The shots rang out at 6 a.m. Zinaida Portnova died instantly. Her body was buried in an unmarked grave. The Germans disposed of executed partisans in mass graves outside the city, locations kept secret to prevent martyrdom sites. They thought if they erased the body, they could erase the story. The Nazi authorities tried to suppress all information about her. They filed her execution as routine, another partisan eliminated. Case closed. What they didn't know was the true scope of what she had accomplished. After the war, when Soviet forces liberated Vitebsk in 1944, investigators arrived at the former Gestapo headquarters. The building had been partially burned, records destroyed. The Germans had tried to erase everything. Initially, Soviet investigators assumed the kitchen had experienced routine problems with food safety. They had no idea that a single teenage girl had systematically poisoned German personnel for 2 years. The story of Zinaida Portnova was nearly lost to history. But then the survivors started talking. Over several years, former partisans began sharing their stories. They mentioned a girl named Zina, who had worked in the German kitchen. They remembered hearing about poisonings. A researcher named Maria Kovalenko became interested in 1947. She was documenting partisan activities in Belarus, interviewing survivors. She kept hearing the same name, Zinaida Portnova. She tracked down Zinaida's grandmother, who had survived the war. The old woman told her everything. She had kept Zinaida's diary, a small notebook where the girl had occasionally written in code. Kovalenko connected the dots. She found former German officers willing to talk. She examined hospital records from the occupation. She interviewed partisans. She pieced together a timeline spanning 2 years with at least 100 confirmed poisoning victims. Soviet authorities eventually determined that Zinaida Portnova was directly responsible for the deaths of at least 100 German military personnel. Each one represented a disrupted operation, a canceled raid, a delayed offensive. Time bought for partisans to escape, for families to hide, for the resistance to continue. The ripple effects were impossible to calculate. How many people lived because German operations were disrupted? How many families escaped because intelligence was delayed? In 1985, Zinaida Portnova was posthumously awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest honor the country could bestow. But even then, her story remained relatively obscure. The current obscurity is profound. Outside of Russia and Belarus, almost no one has heard of Zinaida Portnova. There are no major films about her life, no best-selling books. There's a small memorial in Obol, a street named after her in Vitebsk, and a brief entry in Soviet history books. Most people, if they know about resistance poisoners at all, know about male partisans, about trained soldiers. They don't know about the 17-year-old girl who infiltrated German headquarters with no training, no backup, and no expectation of survival, who killed more than 100 enemy personnel using nothing but poison and courage, who saved her grandmother by stabbing a guard, who endured torture without breaking, who died with a smile on her face. This story matters because it challenges everything we think we know about heroism. We expect heroes to be soldiers, to be adults, to have weapons and training and support. Zinaida Portnova was none of those things. She was a teenager who worked in a kitchen. She was armed with poison and determination. She fought in a war that happened in the shadows, in moments between cooking and cleaning, in the space where no one was watching. Her heroism wasn't the kind that gets statues and parades. It was the kind that requires waking up every day knowing you might die before nightfall and choosing to keep fighting anyway. It was the kind that means looking at impossible odds and saying, someone has to do something, and understanding that someone is you. She was 17 years old. She weighed less than 90 pounds. She killed more enemy personnel than most trained soldiers. She did it alone. The intangible legacy is what lives on. Because somewhere in the records, in the stories passed down, in the history that almost forgot her, there's the proof that resistance is possible. That ordinary people can fight back. That a teenage girl, with nothing but poison and determination, can shake the foundations of occupation. She fought because fighting was the only acceptable choice. She died because death was always the likely outcome. And she won because her story survived barely, incompletely, but it survived. That is why Zinaida Portnova deserves to be remembered. At the end, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share.